Joining me now is Joel Colyer, VP of Global Medical Products and Distribution Marketing with Cardinal Health. We're going to be talking about Cardinal Health Monoject needles and syringes and the impact and why it's so important for U.S. manufacturing, creating products for clinicians in today's environment. So, Joel, thanks so much for coming on the show, and it's great to have you on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation today.
So, Joel, you and I had a chance to meet up before this conversation, and I got to learn a little bit about you. And you've got some experience outside of healthcare. And so I'd love it if you just kind of talked a little bit about, your experience in supply chain outside of healthcare and kind of what led you to healthcare today.
Yeah, so I have a unique background. A lot of my initial experience was in consumer packaged goods. My claim to fame is that I sold cereal and Pop-Tarts for Kellogg's. So I know all the characters from the Kellogg team. And then I've been in a number of different industries. But I started off in sales, but then really got an interest in marketing as I started working with customers and understanding why they bought the products that they did and what drove their purchases. And I'd always had my eye on Cardinal. They actually started off as a food distributor, so I'd worked with them personally in the past. And then when they were started expanding, they had some openings. I found it really interesting and found a job that was a good fit for me. And I've been here for 18 years now. So it's been a great experience.
I'd be really surprised if the people listening aren't familiar with Cardinal Health at this point. You all are really helping to move healthcare forward as a global medical and pharmaceutical distributor and manufacturer, and you support patients and customers across,
just a shorter supply chain and better control over that, and have actually product that's produced closer to our customers, which has been proven to be really important for us over the past year.
I feel it gives you an advantage to be able to control your supply chain even more tightly, does it not?
It does. It gives us better control. It actually shortens things from a time frame perspective, right? If you think about ordering something from Asia, for example, versus something you have based in the US, you're cutting over 2/3 of your supply chain time out just from a transportation perspective. So a lot of value there. And there's economic benefits, there's timing benefits, there's also sustainability benefits as well. You think about all the containers that aren't have to be shipped halfway around the world. So you save on carbon emissions in terms of doing that. So there's a lot of synergies there in terms of bringing that back to the US.
Yeah, it's funny. I just had a conversation with a potential guest that's going to come on the show in the coming months to talk about sustainability. And, it really takes help from companies like yours to pull that off. Because if you're lucky enough to have somebody focused on sustainability in healthcare, it's usually a one-man show. And it takes, it takes partners like Cardinal Health to really pull that off. And I think it's great to see you kind of leaning into that. As we drill down a little bit into needles and syringes and manufacturing, what are some things that your customers have been thinking about in regards to that? Or maybe if they haven't really taken a look at it, what should they be thinking about that others are?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Number one is quality, right? And we really focus on quality, and we have a real focus on that in our manufacturing sites. And we're really stringent about how we do that in terms of meeting OSHA requirements, in terms of having the right requirements that we have to get those products to our customers. So what we do is we have a really dedicated effort at both our manufacturing sites. I should probably mention where those sites are. We have one in DeLand, Florida, and we have one in Norfolk, Nebraska. But we have independent manufacturing sites there with its own staff there in terms of monitoring quality and making sure that the products we're putting out meet those highest standards. And it's something that's going to be very consistent and very predictable for our customers, which is really important. And when healthcare supplies, you want things that are going to act as you expect them to. So the fact that we have that quality supply, that really helps customers in terms of making sure that that's not something they have to think about and they can really focus on patient care.
You noted the sites where you have manufacturing. And what I love about that is there's a lot of impact on bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. on the communities. And so you talked about some things like, just having availability. You talked about the impact on the environment, but also what about just economic growth for the communities that you have these plants in? I mean, that obviously has a big impact.
Yeah, it's interesting because our manufacturing sites are both, I'll say, more rural environments. So it is a more important employer in terms of where they are geographically located. And that actually gives us, I think, a benefit in terms of both recruiting and retention of our teams. I'd mentioned we have over 60 years of history. We have a lot of people that have over 20 years of service in those sites. Like I said, we had scaled them down, but we never really shut them down. So we've had people that have been there continuously. And to have that level of knowledge and expertise that we can count on and go back and rely on as we look to manufacture and get that stood back up and actually increase the amount of volume going through there is extremely helpful to us.
You talked about that expertise, and I'm just thinking about like innovation as a manufacturer. How much does it help to have that expertise, right here at home, in your plants?
Yeah, it's definitely a benefit for us because I'm a big believer of my marketing teams getting out to the manufacturing sites and understanding how the products are made, seeing the lines actually running. So when you want to talk about innovation, whether that's how to make something be produced more efficiently, or if it's a new product you want to introduce, to be actually be on site and talk to the staff there, the engineering staff, the quality teams, that really helps in terms of working through potential issues or thinking about how do you optimize things. So from an innovation standpoint, having that proximity actually helps quite a bit because innovation is typically, I won't say always, but typically easier when you can get together in a room or at a site and talk to your coworkers and your cross-functional teams to do that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about those whiteboarding sessions, and sometimes the people that have their hands on the manufacturing are the ones that have the most, knowledge on the product at every minor stage throughout the manufacturing process. Just collecting that communication and that information is got to be hugely helpful. The other thing too is you've been in the business over 60 years. So like you mentioned before, this isn't the first time that you were manufacturing in the US. And so I would imagine that the organization kind of knows, the ways to make this successful because you have that long history. Like we talked about expertise, maybe as individual employees in different roles within the organization, but talk about the importance of that expertise from an organizational level.
Well, if you think about it, right, when we decided to bring the majority of the manufacturing back to the US, it wasn't a new startup, right? And when you have a new startup, there's training, there's getting people acclimated to the site. The fact that we had that continuously going, we had on site expertise that we could leverage. So it's really more of a restart than it was just starting things up from scratch, which is much more efficient. You can actually leverage that knowledge base and experience as you're doing that. And it really helps you do that more efficiently and more quickly than you would otherwise.
Hmm. That's a really good point. There's been a push for lots of organizations to bring manufacturing to the US, but you were obviously able to do that much faster for all those reasons. And so you're able to serve your customers much more quickly with this approach. And what is the path forward as you reprioritize your efforts in the US? Maybe talk about that vision, for now and going forward.
So when I talk to our customers, I try to remind them that these are highly regulated medical devices. So you can't be producing in one place on a Friday one week and then on another place on a Monday, right? You have to go through a lot of qualifications. We talked about quality. We talked about, being regulated. So that takes a lot of time to do that and go through the rigor that you need to do that. So the fact that we already had the sites set up and already had the quality systems in place, again, enabled us to do that much more quickly than we would have been otherwise.
Yeah, so being able to do that so quickly, I would imagine you're just continuing to advance your strategy, right? Like this is just the beginning.
Correct.
So what is that? What does that path forward look like?
Yeah. So, from a strategic standpoint, right, we looked at the portfolio and said, okay, where do we need to start producing product the most? What does the market need from us in terms of supply? So, we looked at those heavy moving SKUs and made sure that we started focusing on those first. And we kind of been working our way down in terms of, I'll say, the SKUs with less volume as we've done that. But we're building out that full portfolio. And while we're doing that in concert, we're also looking at innovation, right? In terms of what new products are needed in the market. We launched some insulin needles that we're going to be expanding. So looking at where the market is going, there's a lot of uh, increase in self-injection from just the general public or home healthcare. So we continue to look at those trends and understand what the market is doing and where the market is going to make sure that we're managing our core portfolio, but we're also looking at where we need to fill in gaps or bring in new products to make sure that we're filling in those needs from a market perspective.
Yeah, that's great. How much do your customers kind of help you shape that, like that product feedback loop from your customers? Like how important is that to helping direct strategy?
Yeah, we work with our customers and also our salespeople. What are you using? What are you short of? What are you going to be using more of? Looking at those usage patterns that they have, and we really communicate closely with them. And we've actually built out a portfolio to say this is initially what you would need to kind of convert from what you're using today over to Cardinal Health. We call it a whole house portfolio. So we've developed that, and that's something we've been using to go out to the marketplace. That's actually been received really well.
I was kind of hoping you could talk more about those portfolios too, because I've heard a constant theme around safety and compliance, throughout our discussion on especially around the US manufacturing and just continuing to drive that as well as innovation. But can you talk about, basically the background on needles and sharps? And I know you have some other portfolios like containers and just the breadth of safety solutions that you have out there.
Yeah. So one of the advantages that we have in this portfolio is we have really well-known product names. And when a customer uses the brand name as opposed to the actual product, that you've actually made a really good impact with your customers. So we have our Monoject line um, that people know really well. We have our Magellan line of safety needles as well. We also have our Smart Tip line, which is a needleless solution that we have. And that's to make it easier for our clinicians and also promote safety. One of the big issues with our clinicians is needle stick injuries. So we're looking at how do we maintain that as an engineering control for our customers to make sure that we're keeping them as safe as possible. And then you'd mentioned we also have containers to put them into. So just making sure when they're finished being used that we have a place to put them that is safe and secure. And we make sure that our patients are safe from the time that they pull it out to use it from the time that it's disposed.
I worked as a nurse for over 20 years, and I definitely am all too well aware of the risks of needle sticks. And I kind of remember, I don't think this happens anymore, but when I was practicing early in my career in the 90s, I can't tell you how many times, especially in more outpatient settings, we'd get over to the sharps container and the needles, it would be overstuffed. Nobody had changed the container and the needles are kind of sticking out. And that's not even just what can sometimes happen when you're delivering patient care. Sometimes you got a whole bunch of things in your hands that's set out on the table, and you just make one kind of not so smart move, and the next thing you know, you've had a stick and you're off to OC Health, and you've got to have blood work and testing to make sure that you didn't have an exposure. And so I'm assuming in some of this innovation is like sort of helping prevent those situations from happening, and prevent those needle sticks, which obviously have a big impact on the workforce, I should say specifically the nursing workforce that's out there, which is getting a little bit smaller. I mean, you really can't afford to have nurses out for any extended period of time due to any kind of injury.
Yeah, and I'd say with this portfolio and a lot of portfolios in general, the more you can have the clinician focusing on the patient and the care of the patient and less about things like you're talking about, like, hey, I need to avoid a needle stick injury or my sharps container is too full. I need to think about that. If they can just focus on the patient and taking care of the patient with the products, again, the products that we rely on the most are the ones that we think about the least, right? You think about the products that you trust the most. It's the ones that you pick them up, you use them in a predictable manner, and everything goes exactly as you plan. So then you can focus on the task at hand. So that's really important, right? Because we think about both the clinicians and the patients as we develop our portfolio.
Some of the biggest complaints from nurses is not having more time at the bedside. So to your point, just, helping enable them to spend more time on patient care and to do it well. I think that's so critical to the mission of healthcare. I want to go back to regulatory and compliance a little bit though. Like, how much does OSHA influence, the direction of manufacturing in general? I'm assuming OSHA is a big consideration.
Yeah, OSHA is also ISO, right? As we look at that. So whenever we're thinking about producing a product, we're manufacturing it, we are packaging it, we are always thinking about those. And when let's say we develop a new product, we think about it from end to end, right? In terms of How do we procure the raw materials, making sure that those stay in the state that they need to be? How are we producing those? How's the packaging to make sure that it's sterile and it's going to remain that way as it goes from our factory all the way to the storeroom where the hospital or the ASC is going to be using it? So we think about those things all along the way and make sure that we document in terms of how we're putting those controls. We have a very strict and stringent quality management system we use to do that, just to make sure, again, that the certainty is there. These products obviously need to come out of the package, again, be sterile, be used for their intended use, and then put away, and you don't think about them again. To us, that's the perfect journey for that product.
You also you kind of laid out, three innovations. You talked about the Magellan line that everyone's pretty familiar with, and Smart Tip and Monoject. But I wanted to talk about ease of use. We've put a lot of emphasis on the clinicians, but insulin needles are often self-administered by the patients themselves with absolutely no clinical training. And that's a scenario where safety really comes into play, I would think. Can you talk a little bit more about the Monoject insulin pen needles and the thinking behind that, knowing that self-injection, introduces maybe less knowledge and education around needles and safety?
Yeah, I've actually had personal experience, not with insulin, but when I was younger, I self-administered allergy shots, right? So you think about simple things like is it supposed to be subcutaneous? We actually designed the needles with the right gauge and with the right depth, right? So it's actually being administered in the right part of the body. I know, again, when I self-injected, I had shorter needles, just to make sure that it went in the right spot. So we think about those things. And then as we introduce our products, we make sure we have a lot of support materials that we have both online and some other sources where people can leverage and learn more about the products and the proper use. So as more care changes to home, and you have both self-injection as well as healthcare providers doing that within the home, we need to make sure we're providing those materials to make sure people are comfortable using those products. This can be a little intimidating, so we want to make sure we take the intimidation away from that.
I absolutely love that innovation. Anything that you can do with the engineering to help people use the product the right way, like hats off to the thought that really went into that and the development of the Monoject.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, everybody in the marketing organization, whether or not they're in this portfolio or not, we go through a series of stringent tests where we need to understand that in terms of what's the engineering control. If you do have an incident, what's the protocol for handling that? So again, our general population internally knows all those things. So the fact that we have that knowledge base that we've already captured to train our own folks makes it easier for us to train people outside the organization.
I
And
love
you
that.
talked about it too as a clinician, right? That's one of the, I'll say, one of the curses of the trade, right? If you go in and you know more about the environment than you would otherwise. I know as a Cardinal Health employee, I will go in to a doctor's visit and I'll look at what kind of products they had, what's there of our competitors, what's ours, et cetera, right? You start to do a little bit of inventory to do that. So it's just natural when you're in the business like we are.
Yeah, they say nurses are the worst patients, but that really can be expanded. If you're a subject matter expert in healthcare, you're doing what you were doing. You're assessing. I mean, that's what we're all taught to do: assess the situation, and you want to know what products are being used in the delivery of your care, especially if you know how those products are manufactured, especially when you're talking about quality and safety.
Yeah, and then selfishly, how can we get more of our products into that site, right? So
Yeah.
you think about that as well. I always tell my team, always be selling, right? So you're in that environment, trying to think about how you can sell more products there.
Yeah, I have definitely, in my sales career in the past, I've done the same, and I've thought about it during, small routine, procedures and things like that. You're right. You see everything that's coming into the room. You're very well aware of the products that are being used. You mentioned the US video. It's on the homepage for the Monoject. We're going to have a link in the write up so everybody can go take a look at that. There's information on the website about the Monoject Magellan needles and syringes, as well as Smart Tip vial access cannula and the Monoject insulin pen needles. So make sure you visit cardinalhealth.com/monoject, and the video is going to be right there when you land, but there's going to be lots of other information as well. I can give out some more contact information and the social media here in a minute, Joel. But I just wondered, is there anything in this discussion that we didn't cover that would be really important to mention before we wrap?
A lot of people know Cardinal Health, a lot of people don't. One of the things that we try to do, right, is put the patient and our customers at the forefront of everything that we do. Patient care is obviously the focus of everything that we do every single day. So again, we want to make sure that we're engaging with people, and we're always happy. We do a lot of voice of customer research. We go out and talk to clinicians. We go out and talk to people in the, in the supply chains, et cetera. We just want to make sure that we are delivering the best experience possible. So I just like to wrap up and say we're always happy to take feedback, positive, negative ideas, just to make sure that we're doing the best we can for our population, both on the patient side and on the customer side, those who deliver.
Excellent. Well, just a reminder, everybody, visit cardinalhealth.com/monoject. You're going to see the US video there. You can also reach out to your local Cardinal Health rep or visit their LinkedIn page to learn more about the company. They've posted lots of videos on LinkedIn showcasing their quality efforts and their employee stories, their manufacturing legacy. They've got a great piece on needle stick injury prevention, and they partnered with Becker's. So there's lots of great resources for flu, diabetes, and needle stick injury prevention on the website. So again, make sure you go and check out cardinalhealth.com/monoject. And Joel, great job. Great job bringing things to the US. And you did a fine job on this podcast, kind of talking about the quality, the compliance, the manufacturing. And it was a pleasure having you today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I enjoyed the conversation.